Welcome to Conversations with Cathy. I'm Cathy Russ, the director of the Troy Public Library, and with me today is Anna Clark, author of the book The Poison City. We're so excited that she's here with us today. So Anna, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I'm a journalist who lives and works in Detroit. I did not grow up in the area, though. I grew up in a little town in southwest Michigan called St. Joseph, right on Lake Michigan, and found my way here about, I guess a little more than a decade ago, in 2007, after going to school in Ann Arbor and then going to Boston for a few years. So I'm a self-supporting freelance journalist. It's a strange way to make a life, but it's really wonderful and exciting because I love writing and I'm fascinated and awed and interested in the things that are happening in our world.
Well, and clearly you have been very successful and you're very good at what you do, because I just want to read a few accolades for The Poison City. So it was a Washington Post notable work of nonfiction. San Francisco Chronicle named it one of the best books of 2018. Amazon, it was in the top 40 of 2018 books, one of its best nonfiction books of 2018, also one of the best books of July 2018. New York Public Library, best books for adults. Kirkus Reviews, best nonfiction of the year, best crime and injustice books. And I have to tell you, as a librarian, one of our inside jokes is that it's basically impossible to get a good review out of Kirkus.
No kidding. You pulled it. I did not know that.
So that's another reason why it's
I was happy anyway, but
it's very exciting to meet you because you're a unicorn.
That's amazing.
It's also one of Audible's best books of best audio books of the year. Planetism, which I have not heard of, but I believe it's. I looked into it. It's a government.
Yeah, kind of an urban planning, environmental thing. Honestly, I don't know how to say it out loud either. I only read it, so I've never actually said it out loud. But it's like a news site that covers like how cities are made, basically.
Well, they named it one of the top 10 urban planning books, best urban planning books of 2018, and the list goes on. Historical Society of Michigan State History Award. It was a Michigan notable book, and longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction. So how does that make you feel?
Especially when you put that all together, I don't even know what to say. It really has been a wild ride. I mean, like on one hand, the book is the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life, and just finishing it felt like a triumph. And the fact that it's out in the world and people are actually reading it and responding to it is truly mind-blowing, and is something that I dreamed of since I was like a little girl, and I can only hope to just continue to be worthy of that and make sure that I'm keeping the spotlight on where it really matters, which is, the people in Flint and cities like it and who have stories that deserve to be chronicled well and truthfully.
So tell us, how did you come to this story? You were from St. Joe's, and then you are based in Detroit now, but this is Flint. So how did you come to the story, and what made you want to write about it?
Yeah, Flint was a town I didn't know really well. I'd been there a few times, and I'd actually written some articles about it, but I didn't come to the water crisis stories until a lot of people much later than I should have. I write about a lot of things as a freelance writer, including things like sports and book reviews, but what I've written about most has been about a lot, the questions of, just urban policy, how kind of like what that other news outlet, like how we design the places we make and how it influences the lives of the people who live in it, the weight of history and shaping our communities, how to deal with the really hard questions, especially in cities like Detroit or like Flint, where things are really kind of pushed to the edge. What do you do with that? How can we move forward with that? How can we envision more just, inclusive, equitable, healthy spaces? And so I'd written about stories like that for years. Most especially Detroit, of course, since that's where I was, and so much has been happening in the city with the bankruptcy and emergency management and all kinds of things like this. And that was in education in many ways as I was sorting my way through that. And and it is ultimately like what led me to Flint Story too, because clearly a lot of the same issues are at play and came to a really dramatic cataclysm with this like water story. So initially I was writing articles about it for various magazines and newspapers, and it was pretty clear early on that it deserved a much longer chronicle, like not least because even when you wrote a long article, there was just, it was such a strange and complex and confusing story, and there was so much history behind it. There was just so much that was always left on the table. And even with that huge global spotlight that was like on the city for a while, I mean, back in like 2016, it was mind-blowing how many people were here. There was like presidential debates and that like Academy Awards. Like it was a really weird, surreal time.
Everybody was talking about it. Everywhere you turned,
like
you came across it.
You were here,
for sure.
and like it was like it's like, and it feels, it wasn't even that long ago, and it's still kind of crazy to believe that that happened. But even with that spotlight, I felt like there was a lot that was just not being talked about, or not being talked about well. Even with good intentions, a lot of things were just. It just deserved a longer look. So somebody reached out to me and asked if I would, based on one of the articles I'd written, if I would be interested in expanding it into a book, which was kind of great, right? Like, I mean, I was cautious at first because we were still in the midst of that big spotlight, and I was a little afraid they just wanted some kind of rip from the headlines, quick on the shelf, like let's exploit this basically, which I did not want to do. Like if I was going to do this, I wanted to do it for real and be serious about it. But fortunately, the agent that reached out was very much into that, and we had a really good long conversation, and she helped me put together a book proposal, and we put it out there, and some people were interested, and within like 6 weeks, it was the thing I was going to be doing for the next couple of years, which was astonishing and made me, I don't know, just really called on me to summon some courage and to go forth boldly.
But also realize the dream, though, right?
Yeah. It was exciting. Of course, it was exciting, and an honor, and nerve-wracking, because I wanted to make sure if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right, Like, I mean, at minimum, I was going to tell the truth and be accurate, and if it could also be a good book, like one that people. Resonated with people who are in the city or near the city in Michigan, or who are not new to a lot of these issues, but also for people like very far away who live in very different kinds of places, who've never been there in their lives, but can still see some of the patterns that we're talking about and are invested in these questions of the common good, that I think are raised with a story like Flint's, like that's, I don't know. That's what I hope to contribute to. So it was amazing.
Well, and one of the things that I was so impressed with is you bring so much to the story. I mean, it's certainly the story of Flint, but it takes a look at environmentalism, racism, urban planning, city infrastructure, city funding, and obviously I work for the city of Troy, so I could, what you wrote about revenue sharing resonated with me, for example. There's so much in this book, and you pack a punch in a not extremely long book and very easy to read. So how did you structure everything to make it understandable to somebody who may not have a background in any or all of these topics?
Right. I mean, that was what was exciting about this particular story, because it does touch on so many things, and I think that's partly why it got just hit people so hard. It's just because it touches on so many things and brings it together in a really powerful way. But yeah, I mean, with structure, a lot of it was trial and error. I mean, if I'm completely honest, there's a longer project and a complex project. And you have the chronology of what happened over the last few years in Flint to be your kind of anchor. Like, how do I tell this story, and keep it rooted in the real lives of the real people who are there? How do I make this city a really vivid and concrete place? To keep it hooked there, so that there's a narrative here, and it doesn't read just like a report on all these other really important issues. Though of course, I wanted to. Not do justice to all that too, and so so to a certain extent, I was just trusting my own kind of curiosities, oh, here's the part where we bring up lead for the first time, for example. And when lead comes up into the story, that's an opportunity to go backward and look at the history of lead, like all the way back to the days of when alchemists were trying to turn it into gold, you know? And it's like fascinating. It's like such a strange thing. We have, for literally thousands of years, been trying to make lead into something it's not, to the point where we built all our cities with it, you know, with paint and the fuel and the pipes. And even though for a very, very long time we have observed how it has toxic effects on people, it's just been plain to people. And it was just, and then, you know, so I can go into that, and then I can kind of come back and carry the story forward a little bit. And when we get to the part in the story about the Legionnaires' outbreak in Flint, the part that actually killed people, though it's weirdly less well known than the lead crisis. And that's an opportunity to kind of go backwards and be like, what even is a Legionnaire's disease, and why is it named after the American Legion? You know, and that takes us to this, like, you know, 1976 in Philadelphia during the bicentennial, and this mystery disease outbreak, and we can go into that, and then we kind of come back forward. And so basically I tried to keep what was happening in the city and the voices of the people there as the sort of main thread, and then kind of keep moving when there's an opportunity to go backward and dig into some issue or story or history or science, you know, like that brings texture and depth to it, then I would do that. And then my editor, though, kept telling me you should be like, okay, we got to reel that back in. You know, like we've been in the 19th century for too long. We got to come back.
Well, that's the fun of research too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're like off on a different topic. But that's
you're a librarian, so you totally get it. I mean, like it's exciting. You know, I love being a reporter and talking to people who are alive now. But my God, like the wealth of archives and, you know, books and papers and letters and stuff that are out there. I mean, I easily could have spent many more years working on this.
Well, so during your research, were there any highlights that came up or anything that struck you that you thought people really need to know this? I mean, obviously the crisis itself, what led to the crisis, but just anything that you thought, I had no idea, and your average person would never know this.
That's an interesting question. I think a number of different things. I mean, you mentioned revenue sharing. I think that's one piece for how much it contributed to the crisis and to the challenges a lot of cities are facing. It's gotten, you know, proportionally much less coverage than I think it should, because it's very kind of a wonky thing, but it's really important. And it's basically just how cities are able to pay for public services. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's you know, and especially to have that cut as seriously as it has been in Michigan for many years now, decades, like at this point. Far out of proportion than any other state, and to do that in the same years as where we had a recession and a housing crisis where property taxes were also lost, which is the other way, you know, they're able to pay for public services. I mean, it's no wonder that like cities are really, you know, strapped and have to come up with make a lot of tough decisions. And especially when you're a city that's like really broke. I mean, how are you know, like you have no margin of error here. I think that was something I really wanted to dig into a little more and put some precision on it, because it's a choice. It's a choice. Like how, you know, do we as a state, do we support cities? Do we think the local services matter? I mean, most of us, I would argue, do think it does, and it has real concrete effects on our lives. It's actually life and death, you know. If we get into our like police and fire services, I mean, maybe we should start asking, you know, better questions about where that money is going and why it's been Michigan's so out of the mainstream with the rest of the nation, and how we're doing that. I mean, that's one piece, and then the, you know, some of the other pieces, it's just like the history of, you know, how we designed our cities unequally. I mean, we just literally did that. We just literally, by law, at every level, you know, designed cities to be segregated and maintain that with a vicious seriousness, and created patterns that are just still playing out today, very plainly. I mean, we can just all see it with our own eyes. And I hope some, you know, bringing some of the research there to show how that pattern keeps playing out, even though we have had some really important laws and progress since then, I think is really important to kind of reckon with what we're dealing with here when we're trying to figure out how to build safe communities and to set them up to flourish rather than fail as they did here.
And suffer. You know,
Yeah.
even if you don't fail, still some suffering.
I mean, because we're talking about real people in the end. I mean, this isn't. These are all like big ideas, but it really comes down to just like how people can live their lives, you know. And all of us want to be able to drink water and trust that it's safe and give it to our kids and not have to feel afraid of it, especially in this state. My God, like water is our great blessing and responsibility. I mean, like if we can't figure out how to get fresh water from like Lake Huron to 70 miles inland and not have it be toxic, like what are we even doing? You know, I mean, like we got to figure this out. Like we got to figure this out. And I think there's many different kinds of people in Michigan. We have many different kinds of beliefs and disagreements and all that. I feel like one thing we can and should all agree on is that we love our water. We want to take care of it. We want to help it, make it possible to take care of us and our future generations.
Yeah. So we're going to take a little break.
Okay.
When we come back, we're going to talk some more about the Poison City. We're going to talk more about Flint, and we're going to talk about what's next.
Thanks.